Season 2 of Love, Transform, Evolve is brought to you by Dreams Financial. When I was looking for a new financial advisor, Alex and Steph were the obvious choice. They didn't just see me as a client, but rather as a partner in building and protecting my wealth. Their personalized approach and innovative solutions have made financial planning a breeze, not to mention the fact that they are in it with me, explaining everything as we go so that I always know where my money is going and why. And when it comes to the death of a loved one, Alex and Steph are experts at providing compassionate guidance, offering clarity and direction. For more information, visit their website at dreamsfinancial.ca. This is Love, Transform, Evolve. I'm your host, Cynthia Iorio. Welcome to Tightrope Walking, Episode 2. I would say I've been on a journey through mud and healing for over 30 years. Regardless of whether you're drowning in 10 feet of water or in 30 feet of water, you're still drowning.
Our caregivers are always under the threat of child family services.
When I came up with the concept of this episode, Tightrope Walking, I really was thinking about how difficult it is to balance everything. And I'm taken back to when I was a little girl going to circuses. And a side note, I don't really love circuses today, but that's a whole other thing. But as a kid, I was in wonder seeing all of the different performers, but more specifically, watching somebody who is however many feet up in the air, oftentimes, with a net, but as a child, you don't focus on the net, you just focus on that walk. And seeing them focused, taking each and every step carefully, trying to balance themselves, make sure that they don't get distracted by the audience, make sure that they can rely on themselves to perform in front of this audience and be successful. And the older I get, the more I think about tightrope walking. And what does that tightrope walker actually have to do in their brain? What are the things that tightrope walker has to tell themselves in their brain? What are they thinking about as they are walking across that rope, just trying not to fall? Tightrope walking, caregiving is this delicate balance in my mind of self-preservation, of prevention, of maintaining some kind of physical health and mental health through the moments that you feel completely distracted, and trying to remain focused and not lose balance, not fall over. Sometimes you do have to get out of balance in order to get back into balance. But when you're falling, the panic that sets in is completely debilitating. Tightrope walking also looks different. Again, we talked about in episode 1 that we can't paint all caregivers in one sweeping brush. Tightrope walking and caregiving looks different for different people and what they have on their plate. In the healthcare community, when people are talking about caregiving, there's really kind of 3 silos or 3 wings that are talked about. So there's caregiving in aging, there's caregiving in illness, and then there's caregiving in disability. And tightrope walking also refers to the delicate conversations that people need to have with those who are aging about their living process, about their aging process. In illness, tightrope walking, caregiving is trying to keep your head above water as things like the illness itself progress at a pace and at a rate that you can't keep up with, and also you don't understand, and trying to wrap one's head around what is actually happening. So balancing all of this newness in caregiving as it shifts and evolves makes you, the caregiving tightrope walker, have to consider every single step. And considering every single step is exhausting. When I take the example of tightrope walking, and I think about somebody doing it in a controlled environment, like a circus with a net underneath, I think about how that differs from somebody who, for example, is doing that same very walk on a tightrope over Niagara Falls. Sure, they're the exact same steps, one foot in front of the other, but the stakes are so much higher. The misstep is so much higher. And Grant Bruno, who you heard from in episode 1, opened my eyes to what the caregivers in Indigenous communities go through and what the stakes are for them.
There's a lot of similar experiences between caregivers right across Canada, right? Whether you're First Nations, newly immigrant, or, your family's been here for generations. But there are some key differences as well. So one of them is that our caregivers are always under the threat of child family services. And so for a lot of the caregivers that I work with, that's their number one fear. They're going to take my children away. And they're going to take my children away because I'm not supported in any way by the government as other caregivers are. So what happens in Canada, because I work and I'm from, and I grew up on a reserve, I understand just how difficult it is to be able to support your family within that environment. And it's difficult because of a lot of different factors, right? Colonialism is at the heart of it, though.
Right.
So what colonialism has done, so through the Indian Act, which was legislated in 1876, it's gone through some different changes throughout the last decade, but it's still very much the same legislation. And what it does is it allows for a separation of jurisdiction, so to speak. So a lot of the caregiving supports that you're supposed to be able to access are housed within the province.
Okay.
Whereas First Nations on reserve is a federal jurisdiction. And so we don't get the same amount of services in our communities that a lot of other people take for granted. Like in my community on Musqueam, there's 18,000 people. And we have one clinic. We have minimal disability supports. There's some in the school system, but they're really inconsistent. And there's none if your child lives on a reserve and goes off reserve school. And so what happens is that a lot of caregivers feel like because they don't have the necessary support to be able to provide really good care. I've had caregivers of children with disabilities call me, like on my cell phone. I'm like, I'm at my wit's end. I can't get the supports I need. I'm going to have to give my child up to the child family services. And so just because they can't get, respite, occupational therapy or speech language or whatever it may be, that they're at their absolute wit's end because they don't get any other support that I think other people still have challenges getting, but it's still available. But for us, it's not available. And so you can see all the different, how much more challenging it can get for the families in our community. And then you layer that with, again, the threat of child family services coming in and intervening. And I always tell people, like, our children are vulnerable. Our children are targeted, in my view. Like it's a money-making venture still very much for the province, because non-Indigenous families are being paid good money to take our children, but we're not getting those same resources put into our community to keep our children, right? So it gets very complicated very quickly. And a lot of things that I think a lot of caregivers that do take for granted, we just can't.
So I'm sitting here and I'm reminded of the moment that I was introduced to you at the Caregiving Summit, and reminded of that speech that I heard you give, talking about these difficulties that you've just reiterated some of them here. My question to you, this popping up in my head is, there is hopefulness behind your message.
Yes, absolutely.
Where does that come from? Because hearing the facts, it's devastating. So where does the hopefulness come from? Like, how do you envision this?
So one thing that I try and do with all of my research, all of my work, everything I do in the community is I take a very strength-based approach. And I do this for a few reasons. One being that the way that research usually happens in First Nations or Indigenous communities is very deficit-focused. And it actually makes us a lot sicker than we are. The word we would use is it's pathologizing. And so if you see like epidemiology or these different studies that are dying, it's like, how high are their diabetes rates, or what's the cancer rate, or what's the suicide rate, right? And it doesn't actually frame what's actually happening in the community that I'm seeing. So, for example, what I see in the community when I'm there is I see people providing really good care despite all the challenges, who still absolutely love their children, who are still being really generous with other people despite, living in poverty, and who are still trying to hold on to the culture. Now, the culture is, I think, one of the main strengths of my community. So the culture is all sorts of different things, right? So it's language, it's ceremony, it's cultural events like powwows or round dances. And what the culture really does is it provides that foundation from which to operate from for most families. Unfortunately, a lot of families, again, it's been taken away through colonialism, and we're still trying to get it back. But what I'm seeing in the community is that when people reconnect back to culture, they're able to support their families better. And I'm a living proof of this. So I grew up, I didn't have any culture. I didn't go to any cultural events. My mom was we were so disconnected from it. But as soon as I became an adult, I quickly realized that without the culture, I was identityless, right? And I didn't have that foundation for myself to operate from to support my own children. And so what I did over the course of when I went to my first sweat lodge when I was 21. I'm 37 now, so it's about 16 years. I've been to countless ceremonies. I'm currently trying to learn the language. I'm trying to pass those teachings on to my family. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing the best job I can to make sure that we're living a really traditional, and with those traditional values, lifestyle within my home, so that I can show other people that you can reconnect and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Like you can, as long as you're being respectful and doing all the different things within these spaces, that's the most important part. So that's what gives me hope.
Hearing Bruno and what he went through and how he's still maintaining and has able to maintain some sense of positivity and positive outlook really made me curious about the human spirit and about the resilience of the human spirit and the struggle that we go through, and so many people go through, how it actually can change and transform them. And so when I thought about this, I thought, who can I go to really help me articulate what that looks like? And I thought about somebody that I know in my world. Her name is Shari Reinhart, and she is a ghostwriter and developmental editor to aspiring authors who are working on their memoirs and their business books. So she is exposed to a lot of people who've kind of gone through it, and she's helping them shape their stories so that they can talk about what they've been through and how they've been through it and how it has transformed them. She's also the host of a podcast called the Metamorphosis Monologues, which focuses on these stories of struggle and how to overcome those challenges. When she and I were talking personally outside of the podcast, she had mentioned something to me about the struggle being referred to as going through the mud, basically being stagnant. And so I asked her about this when we talked for this episode. Talk to me about truth in struggle. What does that look like based on the conversations you've had with people?
Truth in struggle looks like first bringing awareness into the misalignment, basically, or or God forbid, a terrible crisis hits you or there's a diagnosis. Particularly in caregiving, I know for sure that these are the things that propel us into new situations and having to maybe leave our jobs to take, so there's a crisis, or there is just this bedtime feeling and waking up feeling like, is this all there is? So truth in struggle is actually saying that out loud, looking at it, and then deciding what you're going to do with it. And that's the truth lies in that destination, really, is getting to that core and finding who you are buried under all the stuff.
It's so hard to get to that core through all of the stuff. You once told me in a separate conversation that we had that when I was going through a struggle, actually, because you and I know each other personally, you said, how you doing? And I said, oh, I'm kind of going through it. And you said, oh, you're going through the mud. It's what I call going through the mud. Talk to me a little bit about what it means to you to go through the mud?
That's a very loaded question that would normally require much more than half an hour. I would say I've been on a journey through mud and healing for over 30 years. And I continue to do this work because it feels so good on the other side of it. And on the other side of it, you actually do feel clean. Mud feels like toxicity and heavy and negative, and it can be depressing and very anxiety ridden. And there's a lot of guilt and shame. Like there's a lot of emotions that come up when we start looking at what is really going on beneath the surface of stuff. So I've gone through all kinds of things, right? You don't get to go through life without having challenges. It's what you do with them, I believe, having a strong enough mindset to say, I'm not going to shut this aside. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to have conversations with myself. I'm going to have conversations with others. I'm going to do that work. And honestly, there is freedom at the end of every mud journey. When it's like, welcome to the Camino, like, why do people do that? You get blisters, you're exhausted, you get scraped and scratched, and you're like, it's such a hard thing to do. But why do people do it, right? Something good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Walking the Camino is not the same as going through mud, in the sense, though, that the going through mud feels like you're not moving. And they're going through the struggle of caregiving, for example, kind of feels like you're in a rat race, right? Where you're just constantly dealing with things and not getting anywhere, and just kind of feeling this kind of heaviness. And so, based on the conversations that you've had with different people, what have you noticed, observed, both in your own personal life, but also in conversations with others, that gets them through the mud?
I just want to reflect on what you just described, because in there is something really important that I don't think we said out loud, which is basically that while you're in caregiving, you are in complete service. And I believe a lot of caregivers, myself included, I have a 90-year-old mother, and I'm the only child in Montreal with her now. And we do abandon ourselves. We have no idea we're doing that. We think we are being the best because we're giving everything we have beyond what we have, and we deplete ourselves so much so that we've literally abandoned. We don't know who we are anymore. And I know you're shaking your head because you've probably been there. And so I forget what your question is. I really needed to say that because I wanted to honor all the beautiful souls that are in that situation now, because it's okay to go to bed and go, what about me? What do I need? And how can I give myself that? No one's giving it to you.
Caregivers often feel like they can't complain about the things that are going on in their life because they are exposed to others who they're taking care of, who are going through just as challenging times. But one of the things that I'm reminded of is that regardless of whether you're drowning in 10 feet of water or in 30 feet of water, you're still drowning. And we have to be really mindful about allowing space for our own struggles and challenges in our lives, and allowing ourselves to accept the challenges despite what's going on in everybody else's life. When we can accept that, when we can look at that, then it opens us up to easing through a lot of that stress and that pressure that has the propensity to topple us over when we're doing the tightrope walking. In the next episode, we look at and we talk about just what that mental struggle could look like if we don't allow ourselves to feel. If you like what you heard today, be sure to rate, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes from Season 2 of Love, Transform, Evolve drop every Wednesday morning. I'm Cynthia Iorio. Until next time.